Hey, good evening everyone, and welcome to tonight's Roman Army School lecture. For those of you who've been here before, you know how the format works. For anyone who's joining us for the first time tonight, I'll just give you a quick run through before I introduce our lecturer for the evening. So what we'd normally do is we will have the lecture and then we will have time afterwards for some questions and answers. So if you would like to ask a question, if you look towards the bottom of your Zoom screen, you can see little icons at the bottom. There is one that has 2 speech bubbles and Q&A written underneath it. That's the way in which we'd quite like you to ask questions. The box is accessible throughout the lecture, and I will be able to see the questions during the lecture. You will also be able to ask questions in this box following the lecture. If you type your question in there, I'll be able to see it, read it out to our lecturer. So our lecturer this evening is Richard Bridgland. Richard is a former chair of the Hadrianic Society, which was the precursor to the Roman Army School, and has spoken to us at the Roman Army School several times on the Saxon Shore forts, which will be the topic of tonight's lecture. So if Richard, you're ready, I will hand everybody over to you.
Thank you. Right, I hope you can hear me all right. Welcome to the Saxon Shore, a frontier system, fact or fancy. It's a review of the late Roman forts on the southeast coast of Roman Britain, covering a period of roughly 200 years from about 200 to 400 AD. It was interesting because it was a military intrusion into an area that for about 150 years had been fairly quiet and mainly agricultural. So this begs 2 questions now. Was the command a system as such, and was it an official frontier? Before I plunge into it, there's a health warning on this from 2 eminent scholars of the past. Richard Rees pointed out history and archaeology really doesn't mix too well. But the trouble is, if I follow that, I really won't have much of a lecture this evening. But moving down to Sir Barry, who points out that there's not terribly much factual information about it. So what have we got? It all comes from this document, the Notitia Dignitatum, which Marco expounded so thoroughly at the last lecture.
Richard, can I just interrupt? Could you switch start the slideshow, please?
Okay.
Thank you.
Slideshow. Right, okay, sorry folks. Right, here we go. Notitia Dignitatum. This document is very interesting. It was put together in its present situation in the early 400s, so the content actually was a bit before that and a bit after, and all brought together in one. As Marco pointed out last week, the one we've got is a copy from 1436, and that was a copy of a copy, and the original copy, unfortunately, is lost. So we're working at some 2 second-hand, but anyway, at least we've got this document, and it's the only place where the Saxon Shore is mentioned by name. So each post, it covers all the posts, both civil and military, in the late Empire, and each post was given its page like this. And here we see 9 forts. So as far as we're concerned, this count of the Saxon Shore looks after 9 forts, and these forts have 2 cavalry and 7 infantry spread across them. And really, that's as far as it goes. We don't know when this title was first put into the record book. We don't know why it's a count where the northern commander and Hadrian's Wall and so on, and a lot more forts. is only a duke, a dux. And thirdly, why is it called the Saxon Shore? It's a great debate about that. Some people say it's because Saxons were already living there. Other people say it's because the Saxons were raiding. Maybe either, or maybe even both. Now, one of the problems, really, it's called a blessing and a curse, this document. A blessing because of the information that we have got, and a curse, but we could wish for so much more. So this is the list that we have of the units and the various names for the forts. And he also, like all good late Roman bureaucrats had all his staff as well. We don't know where they were based, but anyway, he had a full office staff. Now, because of the amounts that we know about this, which is not very much, it hasn't attracted the sort of interest that Hadrian's Wall does in the northern frontier, where we get lots and lots of books coming out. In the 20th century, these are the 7 books dedicated to the topic. We have leaflets as well, HMSO leaflets, and we have done excavation reports. But we have just these books. Jessie Mothersole in 1924, that was very much a travelogue, but she had the benefit at that time. She was able to visit Richborough when it was actually being, bush fox was actually digging, so she was first-hand look at that. Then Donald White came in. He was a university professor from Wisconsin in America, and he was very much looking at the sort of research that had been done in the past. And then Stephen Johnson brought out this book, 1976, and this really was a fairly, I suppose, a popular approach. And he attempted to put all these forts together, and as we'll see later on, they were of different times and all sorts of information. He dreamt up this beautiful way of how they would work, and I'll come back to that later. David Johnston in Southampton University, 1975, actually had a symposium about the Saxon Shore, and as far as I'm aware, it was certainly the first, and I think probably still the only, and it was the first time people with any interest were brought together to talk about it. In the end, it really came down to arguments about who were the Saxons, were they living or were they attacking? So not too much came out of that. 1989, Val Macfield wrote a handbook for the 15th Frontier Studies at Canterbury, and that included quite a bit about the Gallic sites as well as our side, on our side of the channel. Pearson in 2002 came out with quite an interesting Roman shore forts book. He went through all the previous arguments and discussions, but he also added a very interesting chapter on building forts, the amount of labour and the amount of stone and all this sort of thing, and worked out trying to find who built them, when they built them, and the labour and so on. So if you want to follow that, that's the book to go for that. And then there was Nick Fields brought out an Osprey in 2006, which was a pretty good run through, but really didn't add anything to it. And that was it until the month before last. This tome appeared from Belgium. It's virtually a PhD, and it's notable because it's got 1,881 footnotes on it. So you can imagine it's not very far removed from the original PhD. But he's got a lot on the Gallic sites, which we hadn't really had access to before. And the whole thing hovered as a gazetteer of both sides of the channel. And it also has a lot about the barbarians that we were up against in the late empire, whether they were Franks or Saxons or various tribes from Germany. So that is actually a very, turning out to be a very, very reference book. So to know really what we're looking at now, we should move and have a look at these 9 sites. And they're spread around the coast, obviously, of southeast Britannia, from North Norfolk all the way down. But they're not all the same date. The forts at Brancaster and Reculver seem to be very late 2nd century, possibly very early 3rd. The others are securely into the 3rd century, although some of them, like Richborough and Dover and Lymm, had occupation by early forts, which had fallen out of use and were then brought back. So that's R9. There are some other sites. Walton, if anybody counting, you will see 10. The problem with Walton Castle is the fact it doesn't exist. It's about 200 yards in the sea at the moment, and we only have names for 9, so it does cause problems. The plans of the various forts. Immediately you will see the 2 earlier ones, Brancaster and Reculver. You could look at those, and anybody from Hadrian's Wall said, oh yes, good Hadrianic. And they do indeed date back to certainly as I said, the later 2nd century. All the rest of them come into the 3rd century. And again, they're quite different in structure and layout from the early ones. So we'll go through them just so you can get the feel for what it's all about. Brancaster. You have to have the sign here because all it is actually a grass field at the moment. So that's not terribly helpful. But bring in your geophys, and immediately you can see it's right on the mud flats here now. There was an earlier site there, an extensive vicus either side, which seems to be aligned to this one, and then this comes in the Saxon Shore fort, which seems to supersede the lot. Moving down, the next one, Burghcastle, the modern coastline is pretty much Great Yarmouth. So this one now, where it was on an inlet, like most of them were placed on inlet, is now quite some distance from the open sea. You can see how close it is to the mudflats because all this site has gone. Very little excavation done on this. And you'll notice here, they had these strange little bastions, which are like little balloons popped on. And they're not much, not very effective because they don't give that field from one to another like the later. And this one is really for Professor David Breeze, because he pointed out to me the other day he'd never been to Burghcastle. This is actually the Hadrianic Society in 1984 on the site with the late Tony Gregory taking us round. And apart from that, you can see the sea is right on the horizon now, but there's still quite a lot of water close to. And this is taken as evidence. This was a sort of in-between fort because the bottom part of these bastions are just butted on. It's only the top half that actually is integrated. So it looks like somebody came along and said, it's bastions, chaps, and they've finished off. But you can see this is the sort of trademark, if you like, of these forts, the tile coursing, and you'll see as we go through that they come in. The great thing about Burr, it's the only one really where a decent military find, and that's this beautiful helmet, or as it was in pieces, which is solidly 3rd century, so no doubt about it. So that's some good evidence. Moving south then down to the next one, in Essex, Bradwell, very little is known about this again, because as you see, at least half of it has gone. And the main feature now is this Saxon, early Saxon wall church put on here, which you can see, St. Peter's Chapel. And it's thought that the fort extended right out into the mud flats, but there's no evidence of that. Now, moving to, I suppose in the World War II parlance, it was Hellfire Corner down here. So at last you've got some feeling with forts. Picolva, which was the early one, Richborough, which is a site, probably one of the few sites in Roman Britain, which was fully used from day one to day end. There's always something going on at Richborough. Dover, Port now, and Lymm, which is in a sad state these days. But in the middle of this is Canterbury, and Canterbury may well have some significance with joining this up, but it's the only place where there's any joint coming together of these forts. So, of course, in the Roman time, the Isle of Thanet was, and there was the Wensum Channel with Reculver, which, as I said, is late 2nd, Richborough, which started in 43 AD and went right the way through to 407, 407, whatever date you like to put on it. And they actually monitored the channel there. So going to Reculver, as I said, it looks quite familiar, and you've got your barrack blocks and a headquarters building and so on. And it's the only site that actually had any inscription from it to actually attach to the fort. This is a site with these rather delightful surroundings, and if it weren't for the sea protection there, we probably would have lost the rest of it by now. And this is the inscription, and people will spend a lot of time trying to sort out the cos here. But the late Professor John Mann pointed out the little we've got on here, all you can say it comes from somewhere in the 3rd century. So it's lovely to have, but not terribly helpful. Moving then to the southern end of the channel is Richborough. And thank you to Tony Wilmot for this brand new plan, which was only published in the last Britannia. I won't go into all the early part of it, but this is what it looked like. It's the Saxon Shore, and the wall round this corner had fallen down, and it was always thought that this bit was a foundation that wasn't used. But Tony has now proved that all this wall down here and up there should be actually here. So this has only just been published, and thanks to Tony for that. And another aerial, and you can see it's worth pointing out these ditches represent, one could say, the very, very first frontier of Roman Britain, because they're said to be enclosing the landing in 43 AD. This comes from early 300, early to mid 300, and the Saxon Shore fort with the road coming out directly to Canterbury. That's we're looking around about 370, 380 for that one. And this is Tony again. Thank you, Tony, for this one. This is the fallen east wall, which in fact has fallen, really reversed face down, and there's the modern railway, and there is a creek now the other side, but the sea is about 2 miles away. These exciting nails from Malcolm Line. The only real evidence, I suppose, hard evidence for any of these forts, of anything to do with shipping, are these 4 nails. And they are the nails that hold together the clinker-built boats, go through and then twisted underneath. So they are ship nails. Moving on now to Dover. There was the early Cassis Britannica fort, which was out of commission by the time this new Saxon Shore fort was put into place. But this one, probably about Brian Fulham thinks it was about Brian Philp about 250 AD, and even this was added to as built with the black bastions. And then at some point, maybe 20, 25 years later, they added further bastions. We don't know why, but that's as it is. And it was obviously very important, this site, because for those of you who've been to Dover will know that the wall went straight through this, what they call the painted house now. So it was obviously very important that this place was where it was, regardless of anything else. The lighthouse at Dover, this is obviously up on top of the hill by the castle, not down in the lower area where the fort is. The importance of this was, this is said to be late 1st century, and of all these fort sites, this is the only place you can go up and actually get a view any distant over the seas, because all the forts are virtually at sea level and have virtually no outlook whatsoever. Moving now westward, we come to Lymm Fort, which is always known as Stutful Castle. And this is Dungeness down here. If any of you have been on the little railway, it runs along here. And this, as you see, was a big inlet with this fort there. And now, of course, again, not only did the sea come in and take the south wall out, and the sea then receded again. So this is an aerial, and this is the outlet line of the fort. Very strange. It's almost like a gable end of a house. And for a long time, it was thought, there's a lot of slumping going on. It was thought that it actually started off square and slumped like this, but it's now been improved. This was the Roman shape. And this is the military canal from the 18th century, I think it is. And this is Cunliffe's, Professor Cunliffe's, Sir Professor Cunliffe excavation. And this is the east gate, and you can see the sort of slumping that goes on this site. And it's an extreme example of coastal change as well. Until you come along to the next one, Pevensey, where again, modern day Pevensey is probably the latest one. This is probably about 290 AD now. And this again is now something like a mile and a half inland. But of course, again, like the others, this is strange ovoid, absolutely unique. And of course, the sea took this out, and the sea again now is about 2 miles away. very imposing, got this tremendous west gateway, and this is pretty much as it originally patched up a bit, Norman medieval castle, and the sea is off in this direction. This was still in use up to World War II, so it obviously was a good site. One thing comes out of this is that because of the name of the fort, Anderida, this unit, the classis, now appears in the coming back to our notitia. This unit appears in Paris, and it's always been said this river fleet, had obviously come from Pevensey. So it begs the question: why would a seagoing fleet be sent to an inland river posting? And this is a tongue in cheek, really. Perhaps the warnings at a notional Paris amphitheatre, which of course is what happened in Rhodes. Anyway, Rome. Anyway, moving on to our last fort, Porchester Castle, my local, I live in Fareham. And also I'd point out Chichester here, and we'll come back to that. Now, Porchester is the only one that still has sea lapping it. But the problem is, like all of these forts now, it's on a harbour, but it tends to be not on the sea. So you've got 5 miles from the fort to clear Portsmouth harbour there, and another 5 miles to get out here. And because it's at sea level, you've got absolutely no way of knowing really what's going on out to sea. The other thing, the nearest Roman road is this one, Chichester and on up to Winchester, which runs across behind quite a rise. But there's nothing very much, or a few small villas, but it's really got very little in the hinterland to worry about, which, apart from Hayling Temple, which you may have heard of. Porchester plan. This was Professor Cunley's excavation, about 1/8. This is full of Norman Castle. This is full of church. So he's got about 1/4 of what was available. And this is as it looks now. So you see it's right on the water of Portsmouth Harbour. I've cheated a bit because I've taken out the church here and the Norman Castle, so you can actually get an idea of what the Roman fort actually looked like. So those are the structures. So we'll turn now, what about the archaeology? Because the excavations have been incredibly mixed. As I said, Porchester, you've got a reasonable amount. Richborough, of course, was thoroughly taken out in 1922, 3, 4, 5. The others really have not really benefited from very much. So, as Pearson said, you can really make of it what you will. And this is sort of the highlights of some of the finds. Very poorly, a bit of spearhead and ballista. So you can't get really very much feel for what was going on. Now, archaeologically based dates for the occupancy. Now, I put this up with, and it comes with a health warning, because the beginning on each one is quite woolly. Likewise, the cessation at this end is also singularly woolly. And the bit in between, which, because the structures are there, it's assumed that they were continuously occupied. But it's worth pointing out there's actually very, very little evidence of pure military occupancy, and virtually no evidence whatsoever, apart from those nails at Richborough, of anything to do with naval whatsoever. apart from the fact that, of course, they have access to water and harbours. So that comes out with a health warning. So now to literary sources, and this is where I break the rules and try to put archaeology and structures and literary sources together. Not good, but it's all we've got. 286, Carausius, our hero from 286, he was given commission to clear the Franks and the Saxons from the sea. But the sources make it quite clear that that's on the Belgica, Armorica, and doesn't mention our side at all. And somehow Carausius then, largely I think because he was saving his skin, because he was, as you know, accused of stopping them and keeping booty for himself. So he kept hold of northern Gallic area and came to Britain with his fleet and his troops. 296, 293, he gets disposed of by his right-hand man, Electus, and it's thought that was probably when Carausius let go the Gallic part of his holdings. So Electus took over for 3 years, and he kept going, but then eventually Constantinus came over in a fork attack, and this was in the Panlat. He said he withdrew from the shore. And why did he abandon his fleet and his port? And nobody knows which of the shore he held, or where his fleet and what port they were talking about. So again, this comes back where we know a bit, but it's so frustrating. Anyway, here's the man himself. I do like this one. It's of course our I'm actually it's great grandson, of course, and this was the really puts on a map what his commission was, to keep this area clear. And he had that when he was evacuated from Boulogne. He was over here, and this is when it's believed probably that it was under him that these forts, Richmond, Richborough, Dover, Lymm, and probably Walton Castle, if we can count that, they were Pevensey, were built by him, not against pirates, but to actually protect his holding against the efforts to repossess. So that's, we don't know, but everybody says, why on earth would you build these huge walls against pirates who probably would avoid them anyway? But and then we're moving rapidly on with the Gallic regions, the 367. Again, explicitly said, the Gallic regions, it doesn't say Britain. But for that, and then the rest of it, the Count of the Maritime Track had been killed, and the Dukes had been ambushed and taken. And there's a certain amount of thought that, oh, well, this Count of the Maritime Track, he was obviously a precursor of the Count of the Saxon Shore, but there's absolutely no evidence apart from the fact he's a count. There's a thought that obviously the Dukes, we assume, is the northern commander in charge of Hadrian Wall and so on. And if that was the case, and we know that there are a lot of problems heading across the water in Ireland, whatever Ireland was in those days, that it's possible this Count of the Maritime Tract was actually working up north. And there was nothing to do with this, the southeast at all. But again, it's one of these things. When you come to all these stories of raiding, it's very, very difficult to pinpoint it because things happen. Fishbourne Roman Palace used to be said, oh, it was probably raiding and so on. But now they say, oh, it was probably burnt down accidentally. So you've got accidental damage. Sometimes things are deliberately dismantled, relocated, building a better villa instead of sitting in your old place. Economic decline, where places are given up. And probably the biggest one, coastline inundation. We've lost so much around our southeast coast that we just don't know we don't know really. So then moving lastly to 400 AD, where the good old Vegetus, scouting skiffs are, and I put this in bold, are attached to the large warships. So the implication is they don't get sent out on their own. They're put out very much like yesterday, for example, we had destroyers going out of Portsmouth Harbour with our aircraft carrying camera. So you've got a little fleet, and that's probably what was done. So we don't even know whether we had triremes, of course, this time, but this is a supposed thing of Dover with a lighthouse and the triremes going out, and with a little skiff attached to them, probably maybe 20 men or something like that, with oars and a mast for sails. And this was a supposition of what happens if the raiders do get in, and this is our side coming out to meet them. One thing about this, it is said on authority that the raiders coming from the Saxon areas weren't into masts and sails, and there's another source which implies that they weren't even rowing, that they were paddlers. So again, this sort of confrontation is very difficult to work out. Now this is coming back to Stephen Johnson, where he came up with this wonderful situation. He plotted all the faults all the way around and the narrows here. And the idea is now that you have the pirates and whatever you like to call them, barbarians, coming here to raid. And when they get here, they're spotted from here and here, and they're captured in a pincer movement and this sort of thing. And that's the end of it. But when you look at the tides and the winds, prevailing winds in the channel, it's very difficult to envisage this actually, the raiders happening. So was there really a seaborne threat to our side anyway? You've got to have action stations. So assuming you've got fleets at these forts, of which is absolutely no evidence whatsoever, they've got to be geared up, ready to set sail, but they can't see anything out there anyway. They're too far away from the sea. So the next problem, you've got to locate anybody. If you can locate them, you've got to intercept them, and then you've got to engage them and board them. So I can never resist putting an asterisk in somewhere. It's you can imagine, totally out of period, of course. But and the other thing, I found no evidence. The barbarians couldn't have done this because they didn't have a sail and this up the top, so that was no good. A crow's nest, and I couldn't find any evidence for any of the Roman fleets having crow's nests either. So to locate fleets out there, intruders, and I looked this up to see what visibility constraints are like. Now, if you've got two ships out on the sea, and assuming you've got crow's nests, or you can get eyes 20 feet above sea level, and the chaser and the chased, you've still only got just 8.5 miles of visibility. So this business about actually spotting intruders, it doesn't really sit very well. And intercepting, again, we've got you've got to, if you spot somebody 8.5 miles away, you've got to be able to get the speed up to catch them up. Now, if the wind is in the right direction, the Roman ships would probably raise sail and get there. But that's from Sean the Grail, the sort of speed you could get. If you're paddling, it's even worse. Now, there is an occasion, it's quite complicated, I couldn't work it out, to show you how faster you had to go and the sea rate, the sea conditions to actually do an intercept in the first place. So this whole thing about intercepting out there is difficult. So assuming that the intruders do land, looking at the land journey times, now remembering the forts are quite spaced out. If the intruders aren't going to sit aim for a fort, are they? They're going to try and go in between. So when you find out something's happening, you've got to get your military and your cavalry in particular out to try and catch them. And this is the sort of thing you're hoping for. But the chances are, if it's a hit and run raid, which most of these apparently from the sources were, you'd never really do very well. Anyway, so it's really just a question of thinking these things through. You read these, oh, they did this, they did that. When you actually boil down to it, it's quite difficult. Now this is a bit more serious now. The thing about this Saxon Shore is that it is a frontier limes, right? And when you look into it, it was pointed out by Philip Bartholomew in 1979. We've got 4 manuscripts of the Notitia, and the first printed copy, 1876, changed what the 4 copies say, militum, to limitum. Now, limitum, fair enough, is a frontier. A militum of the Notitia is just a section containing miscellaneous field armies. So going by that, we can't really say that the Saxon Shore was an official frontier line. Now, this is a bit heretical, but when you look at the sort of block diagram at the empire, you notice that Britain, okay, it's outside the Mediterranean basin, if you like, but it's just as much of the empire as any of the islands in the Mediterranean. And in fact, it's a lot closer than some of these, apart from Sicily. So this frontier is firmly there, Hadrian's Wall, Antonine Wall, but this is just an inconvenience to go from this province or provinces to these provinces, which is the same from Sicily or whatever. So, pause for thought. Now, while all this Saxon Shore forts are going on, things are also happening with the town walls in southeast Britain to put into the melting pot. And briefly, some towns had either late, or if they got walls, they had added bastions. Canterbury had walls, didn't have walls before, and then had the walls more or less the same time that Dover and Limp and so on were getting their new forts. London had many bastions. Verulamium, I think, according to my colleague there, I think they had 2 more. And these, again, now the star in this lot is Chichester, little Chichester down here, quite unimportant in Roman Britain. Round about towards the end of the 3rd century, suddenly sprouts more bastions than any other city in Roman Britain. London might have more, I don't know, but certainly in terms of bastions per length of wall, it's absolutely unparalleled. And the strange thing is, a lot of the city is actually pretty desolate. When they did a big excavation here a few years ago, and did what was the old ship and meat paste factory, it's pretty open in the 3rd century. So what on earth was going on here? Canterbury, as I said, got its walls. A rather strange one is Clausentum Bitter in Southampton, as it's usually attached to. And this is the only one in Britannia, where the Gallic approach was taken, where the original area was actually refortified, but in a smaller area. Strange. It's a strange site anyway. Not enough was done before these pre-war houses were built. So now we're firmly looking at this the southeast corner here, now into the 4th century, when we've divided into the areas. So the 4 province. Now this time, of course, we've got this firm split before the military and the civil administration. So into the mix of the ducks up north, the accounts of the Saxon Shore, all of the vicar and his sub people. Suddenly we've got this. Now, not much, in fact, very little is known about this at all. It's a field army that's sent to Britain. Now, the problem is we don't know when it was put up. We don't know whether it's as concurrent with the Count of Saxon Shore, because they're there together, and this is his insignia. So he comes to Britain. This time, he's got quite a substantial battle group of 4 infantry, but more usefully, I think, 6 cavalry regiments. So we don't know when it was created. We don't really know why and what the role was when they came to this country. But this is a really interesting one, I think. What's the relationship between these military men? How did they work together? We don't know where this command was based, where the troops billeted, and what was the relationship, because we know the various expeditions came to Britain. So the problem is here, we've got, in the later 4th century, apparently Saxon shore forts really deserted, were they used then for temporary billeting of the field army, with the field army in places like Chichester and so on. And I come back to this, again, this was a bit heretical, the look back thing of defense in depth. And I'm not actually saying that was right, but it gives a good idea of where you've got inland forts, you've got forts along the coast, some of which are deserted. The whole thing is much less clear cut than you would expect in early periods. And the Saxon shore forts, well, I think that by this time that they were really works depots, where you'd come along. They were obviously owned still by whoever was in charge. So you've got this paradox between these usage dates, which I've said you've got to take with care. At a station in the ND, which as we've got it. The finished document's about 420, but it may reflect some of the early material. These forts were developed piecemeal, both one by individually, and certainly they weren't all put together as a group. In them, there's little evidence of a consistent naval or military use. That's notable by absence. And of course, making everything much more difficult is some coastal change, the late Roman marine transgression, where the water came in, water came out, and so on. So the only thing I can think of really with these forts, you're looking at them, they're there for something like 150 years, 200 in some places. They could have served in all sorts of they are obviously points of strong points, and they could be used for anything really. I think the only time they were used probably as a proper protection was during the time of Carausius, and I think that was their floriuit, if you like to call it. And after that, they were really just there, whatever you need them for, they were used. So we're left with all these questions. Now you think, what's this doing around? This is our Lord Warden of the St. Ports, just to show you can have important posts, as the Count of the Saxon Shore was, and you don't know what he does. I mean, this post was in the 12th century, still very prestigious, and doesn't do anything. I think he has a meeting once a year, but it's still there. And somebody trying to find out, what does this chap do, is in trouble. And I think even more interesting, this is a diorama of the north end of Portsmouth Harbour. Portsmouth Harbour is off to the right. And this is Portchester Castle, sitting, one might think it's rather uselessly, right at the head of the harbour. So you've got to paddle or sweep or against the wind, if you're lucky, to get 5 miles to get out of the harbour in the first place. That's why in the medieval time they decamped down to Portchester. But direct your gaze to this here, which are the Palmerstonian forts, and they were all built in 1860s against a French invasion. Now, incredibly expensive. There's the tunnelling underneath, millions and millions of bricks, and there's eight of these at Long Portsdown Hill against the French landing and coming to the back and firing down on Portsmouth. But of course, by the time they were built, it has passed. There's no problem. And ever since then, until really in the 1970s, they stayed in the government hands and were used for all sorts of things, militia training, storage, and so on. And I think there's quite a parallel. You've got a building, you use it for whatever you want to use it for. So I think all this discussion about whether Saxon Shores, this, or that, I think there were all sorts of things. So, to finish, the Saxon Shore, I think you could call it a provincial border, creating connection. I think most of the time these things were used, they were connecting point between Britannia and the rest of the empire. And I contrast with a recent book where Hadrian's Wall, Creating Division. And with that, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it.
Hey, thank you, Richard. It was brilliant. I have one question in the box at the moment, but I'll just remind people that if you would like to ask a question, there is the question and answers key at the bottom of your Zoom screen just there. So if you click on that, type your question in the box, we will be able to see it and hopefully answer your questions. So if you're happy to start, Richard, I have just the one in the box at the moment, which is from Susan Biddle, who asks, was it Carausius or Electus who you think built the forts at Richborough, Dover, Lymm, Pevensey, and potentially Walton Castle?
I would go for Carausius because he was strangely powerful. He came over and everybody flocked to his banner. And I think given the amount of labour required, I think it was him. I think by the time Electus came along, some of the steam had gone out of it. They'd lost the continental part, I think. So I don't think there would have been the oomph there then. But I think Carausius, he was the main man.
Yeah, I'd be inclined to agree as such. It's certainly seems that way.
You can't say that archaeological. I mean, you talk 3 years, you know, either way.
Yeah. So, okay. Oh, got plenty more questions coming in now. So one from Jeff Cumbers, which is actually a question that I'd be very interested in as well, which is, do we need to, or are we able to do more excavation at these sites?
They do happen from time to time, but obviously you know what the state of excavation is at the moment. I don't think I'm breaking any confidences, but there will be new excavations at Richborough in September. Historic England. So if you look to see what they were planning to do last year and the year before, you can guess what they're going to do.
Yes. Yeah, I think I'd heard that they were hoping to start excavations down there again.
Yes, but that's the only one I've heard of.
Okay. What else do you have? A question from Andy Fair. Do you think there was an Irish shore as well?
Yeah, I mean, the problem is that it's always said we've lost a bit of the notitia. So there's none of the western side appears. So you've got, you know, the later forts there, you know, in Cardiff and the posts up on the Anglesey and all this sort of thing, and Lancaster and all those sort of things. They're just not there. So I would think absolutely yes, but it's guesswork.
As with so much of these things, isn't it? Guesswork.
That's the great thing about this this topic. There's no black and white, actually, shades of grey. That's why it's so much fun.
Yeah. From Steve Honeysett is a question: Is there any correlation between the icons of the forts shown in the notitia and the actual fort designs?
Absolutely none at all. They're not even in any sort of order. They're just sprinkled on. Now there's a story that Marco was telling last week that the 4 copies that we have from the 1400s of the NT notitia, and each one was made for some prestige recipient, and one of them, I think it's the one that's in Munich. They call it Munich 2 now, technically. The Lord, whoever it was, his people doing his copy, they did this beautiful, romantic-looking castles and that sort of thing, and he sent it back and said, "No, I want a copy of what we've actually got there." Oh, thanks, Tony. Yeah, and he sent it back and said, "I want it much more as you can get from the original copy." And as Marco was showing us last week with the shields and so on, the ones from Munich 2 were much more childlike. It's the only way, and simple. So even that, I think they just. Of course, the notitious what it is. Fascinating.
I have 3 more questions, and then we'll probably be approaching our time at that point anyway. So we'll see if we can get these 3 in. Why do we also have forts on the Gallic shore whilst Carausius was defending Britain, his territory? This is a question from Bernard Van Dale.
Oh, right. Well, obviously, it started. We don't think he was actually instrumental in building that side, because you had a ducks over that side as well. And when Carausius went it off, unilateral, we don't know whether the ducks on the Gallic side actually sided with Carausius or not. I suspect not, because I don't know whether Sophie Van Hoot's probably watching, so she could probably answer very, very lucidly. I don't know. I don't see any evidence really of this joining together and working together. It's a lovely story, but I don't think there's any evidence.
Question from Linda Davis. As a northerner hopefully passing through the southeast in the future, which fort do you suggest visiting?
Difficult one. You must go to Richborough and Porchester, really, I think, are the two. I would go Richborough, because that's got everything there from 43 AD right down to when they were tearfully waving goodbye to them, and whenever it was, this sort of lovely scenario. You must go to Richborough. And Porchester, I think, for looking at the actual walls and the fact that it's still got water lapping almost at high tide. So those are the two. Okay, Linda.
I'll have to see if I can head over that way myself. I've never visited down there.
Oh.
We'll have to get over that way myself.
Yes, just let us know. I'm sure we can sort you out.
Okay, question from Tony Keane is, do you think that there's a link between the Saxon Shore forts and the Yorkshire coast towers?
I could answer in one word and say no, because they seem to be very, they would call a proper system up there. You've got the five coasts, probably coming back ultimately to York, and I think if anything they ought to be under the Norman ducks, really. But again, it's that they are so clearly a late feature, and I think by the time they're in their heyday, if you can call it that, I think us poor souls in the south, I think we've had it. I think we've dissolved in a shambles.
Okay, I've had one final question just sneak in here, so I'll ask this last one. Susan Rands says, thank you for the interesting talk. Is there any evidence of, oh, hang on, something's just popped up over the top of it. Let me see if I can move that. Yep. Thank you for the interesting talk. Is there any evidence of communications between forts or with the inland establishments?
Well, the trouble is, apart from the Kent Four and Canterbury, I did an article for Raz recently on that you could actually propose that working together with Canterbury as the hub and the spokes, and following Mark Corby work he did on Hadrian's Wall, you could actually propose the speed that you could actually concentrate forces there against any problem against that area, and that would work. But that's the only area. By the time you get to Porchester down my way, you're 50 miles from the next fort. I mean, it's the only good thing is again coming back to Chichester. If you've got your field army based there from time to time, I think that would plug the gap quite nicely. But that field army is just a complete mystery. I wish somebody would do a PhD on it or something.
Yeah. Okay, well that just about wraps us up for the evening. So thank you, Richard, for coming along and giving us the lecture tonight. It's very informative, very entertaining, and I'm sure everybody learned quite a lot. I certainly did. Thank you to everyone for coming along tonight as well. And that will be everything for this evening. So details for our next lecture at the beginning of June will be up on our website, which is ad43.org.uk. And that's us finished for tonight. So thank you again, Richard, and good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you very much.